Maru used to be the best doctor at the hospital. Now, he's a male escort at a nightclub. A few years ago, Maru came home from work. The moment he opened the door, he found his sister unconscious. Just as he was about to rush her to the hospital, his phone rang. It was his girlfriend, Jae. Panicked and crying, she told him she had killed someone. Maru was stunned. He didn't know what to do. On one hand, his sister needed him. On the other, his girlfriend was in distress. In the end, he chose to go to Jae. He told his sister he'd be back as soon as possible, but he had no idea that decision would change all of their lives forever. Maru ran as fast as he could and soon arrived at Jaehee's hotel. He pushed open the door and saw a man lying on the floor, covered in blood. Cautiously, he stepped closer to check. The man was dead. In the corner, Jaehee was crouched down, shaking with fear. She looked up at Maru, terrified. Maru calmly asked her what had happened. After listening, he tried to convince her to turn herself in, explaining that it was self-defense and the sentence wouldn't be too harsh. But Jaehee stared at him in disbelief. She had worked too hard to become a respected reporter. If she confessed, her career would be over. She couldn't go back to being poor. There would be no reason to live. Then, suddenly, she grabbed a piece of broken glass and tried to take her own life. Maru struggled to stop her, and in the process, his arm was cut. Jaehee tried to check on his wound, but he pushed her away. He looked at her and asked, "Can't I be the reason you live?" In the end, Jaehee agreed to turn herself in. Maru grabbed the phone and kissed her. But instead of calling the police, he began cleaning up the crime scene. He was going to take the blame for her. What he never imagined was that after everything, Jaehee would leave him for a wealthy older man. Maru called his sister to apologize. Tears welled up in her eyes. 6 years passed. Maru was finally released from prison. In that time, his sister's health had deteriorated due to the delay in her treatment. Desperate for money to pay for her care, Maru took whatever jobs he could. He had been expelled from the hospital because of his criminal record, so he turned to escort work. One day, he was on a flight overseas when a woman suddenly collapsed. Instinctively, the doctor in him resurfaced, and he jumped in to help. As he assessed the woman's condition, he realized she was in critical danger. She needed an emergency bloodletting. Looking around for her family, Maru's heart stopped. A familiar face appeared before him, Jaehee. Both were frozen, neither expecting to meet again like this. Maru turned to her. "Who is she to you?" Jaehee hesitated, unable to answer. But under Maru's intense gaze, she finally spoke. The woman's name was Yoonji, her husband's daughter from his previous marriage. Her words hit Maru like a thunderbolt. Jaehee was married. He could barely process it, but right now, Yoonji's life was on the line. Without hesitation, he took out a needle and inserted it into her chest. Suddenly, Yoonji coughed up blood. Jaehee gasped, not out of concern for Yoonji, but because she knew if anything happened to her, she wouldn't be able to explain it to her husband. She tried to stop Maru from saving Yoonji, but he ignored her. In frustration, she lashed out, "You're not even a doctor anymore." Her words cut Maru like a knife. He stared at her in silence. This was the woman he once risked everything to protect. Time passed. Maru continued his work. Slowly, Yoonji's breathing stabilized. Her blood pressure returned to normal. His job was done. Exhausted, he stood up and left. Jaehee stood frozen. She wanted to call out to him, but she had lost the right to. Maru wandered the streets, his mind flooded with memories of Jaehee. He told himself it was time to move on, to start fresh. But Jaehee dragged him back into hell once again. That day, Jaehee showed up at Maru's place with a gift and a check for $10 billion. She wanted to make up for all the years she owed him with money. Standing in the place where she grew up, Jaehee felt a deep sadness. But instead of seeing Maru, she saw a man and a woman confronting him, demanding compensation because he had broken up their family. Jaehee was stunned. She never expected Maru to end up like this. She later found out from Maru's friend, Jae Gil, that Maru had been fired from the hospital after going to prison. He had no money, and to afford his sister's medical treatment, he had no choice but to become a male escort. His sister was the only family he had left in the world. At that moment, Maru's sister was in the hospital, furious with him. She blamed him for leaving her alone 6 years ago. Her words cut deep, filling Maru with guilt and self-loathing. When he returned home, Jaehee was already gone. A friend handed him the check she had left behind. Maru was livid. He felt insulted and humiliated. He immediately went after her, determined to confront her and demand an answer. He needed to know what he really meant to her. Meanwhile, when Jae-hee arrived home, her stepdaughter, Yoonji, blocked her way. She coldly questioned why Jae-hee had given such a large sum of money to another man. Caught off guard, Jae-hee tried to defend herself, but Yoonji had a photo of her visiting Maru's house. Even then, Jae-hee didn't panic. She calmly claimed that the man knew about Yoonji's past drug possession arrest in the US and threatened her. She warned Yoonji that if the board members of Cine Group found out about it, she would lose her position as the company's heir. The next evening, during dinner, Yoonji told Jae-hee that she had turned the man into the police. That same night, as the rain poured down, Maru left the $10 billion check at Jae-hee's front door without going inside. Even though he despised her, he didn't want to disrupt her life. To secure her wealthy status, Jae-hee falsely claimed she was being blackmailed and reported it to the police, showing no remorse. As Maru stood there, watching her, his eyes turned cold. His last shred of faith in women was completely shattered. He thought about his sick sister, his ruined future because of prison, and at that moment, a seed of hatred began to grow in his heart. Due to a lack of evidence, Maru was released. But looking at his sister lying in a hospital bed, he was finally ready to fight back. His first target, Jae-hee, and more importantly, her stepdaughter, Yoonji. Yoonji was the heir to Cine Group and the biggest obstacle in Jae-hee's life. Unlike Jae-hee, Yoonji was hardworking and kind, always looking out for the company's lower-level employees. But despite her dedication, her father never truly understood or supported her. The only thing that gave her an escape was racing. Maru carefully planned his approach. He positioned himself as a racing expert and made sure to cross paths with Yoonji. During a high-speed race, Yoonji's brakes suddenly failed, and she was thrown from the car. Hearing the crash, Maru rushed to save her. But instead of worrying about herself, Yoonji frantically searched for something. She wanted her doll, the last gift from her mother. With no choice, Maru went back down to retrieve it. But on the way back, the rope securing him suddenly snapped. He plummeted off the cliff and was rushed to the hospital. Though he survived, his body was severely injured. When Yoonji saw him unconscious in the hospital bed, she couldn't understand why a total stranger had risked his life for her. Growing up, she had always believed that men only helped women when they wanted something in return. But she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had saved her life. The next day, she bought him a watch as a thank you gift. But when she arrived at the hospital, she found out that Maru had already been discharged. She couldn't hide her disappointment. Determined, she tracked down his address. Meanwhile, Maru had just arrived home when he received a text from his sister. It revealed something shocking. He and his sister were actually half-siblings. Their mother had abandoned her long ago, and since then, they had been each other's only family. But now, her condition had worsened, and not wanting to be a burden to him, she had secretly left to find her biological mother. However, her mother had remarried. Her stepfather was not only a gambler, but also a violent drunk. Unable to endure his abuse, Maru's sister called the police. The stepfather was arrested, but was soon released. Enraged, he took out his anger on the family again. When Maru got the news, he rushed out to find her. On his way, he ran into Yoonji, who had been searching for him. She flirted with him, but Maru ignored her and tried to leave. Determined, Yoonji followed him to his car. With no other choice, Maru let her come along. Inside the car, Yoonji took out the watch she had bought for him and offered it as a gift. But Maru refused, saying he didn't need it. Then, he added that in the past, he wouldn't have even given her a second glance. But now, things had changed. He told her that starting tomorrow, he would be pursuing her. His words took Yoonji by surprise. Stunned, she tried to get out of the car, only to realize they were already on the highway. When Maru arrived at his destination, he saw his sister's mother. Suddenly, a man appeared and punched the woman. Maru couldn't stand it, so he stepped in and scolded the man. But instead of being grateful, the woman saw her man getting attacked and, in a fit of rage, grabbed a broom and started hitting Maru like a madwoman. Luckily, Maru's sister arrived just in time and pulled her mother away. Yoonji watched from a distance as Maru sat wounded in the night, looking utterly defeated. For some reason, seeing him like that made her heart ache. At that moment, the woman dragged Maru's sister over to him, insisting that he take her away. Maru wanted to take his sister with him, but she refused. She didn't want to be a burden on her brother. Their mother coldly stated that if she had to choose between her daughter and her husband, she would choose her husband. She even blamed her daughter for the way her husband had turned out. Her cruel words completely shattered the girl's heart. Realizing there was no place for her there anymore, she finally decided to leave with her brother. Yoonji quietly watched the scene unfold, pain evident in her eyes. After dropping Yoonji off at home, Maru saw Jae-hee kissing another man. Furious, he got out of the car. Jae-hee was completely shocked to see him. Without hesitation, Maru deliberately woke up Yoonji right in front of Jae-hee. He did it on purpose to get revenge for her betrayal. Yoonji also saw Jae-hee and, sensing the tension, started flirting with Maru right in front of her. Maru played along, cooperating fully. Jae-hee couldn't believe what she was seeing. She never imagined Maru would be interested in another woman. The next day, Jae-hee confronted Yoonji about her relationship with Maru. Yoonji smirked and asked why she cared so much about her personal life. Teasingly, she even asked if Jae-hee had a crush on Maru. Jae-hee tried to warn her, saying Maru didn't seem like a good person. But Yoonji sarcastically responded, "I accepted you, so what's there to be afraid of?" Puzzled by Jae-hee's strange behavior, Yoonji decided to investigate her past. But no matter how hard she looked, she found nothing. Jae-hee had already erased all traces of her past long ago. That morning, Jae-hee and Yoonji arrived at the office at the same time. In front of the employees, Jae-hee went out of her way to fix Yoonji's clothes, trying to act like a caring stepmother, but Yoonji scoffed at her act. Later, Yoonji ran into Maru. They exchanged greetings, but Jae-hee grew nervous. She was terrified that Maru might expose her past. However, Maru acted as if he had never met her before. Casually, he mentioned that he used to be a fan of Jae-hee back when she was a reporter. He liked the honesty reporters had in the past, but, unfortunately, he didn't anymore. Just then, Yoonji's father approached them. He asked who the man beside her was. Without hesitation, Yoonji introduced Maru as her boyfriend. Maru politely greeted the chairman, who then invited him to their home for dinner. Jae-hee's nervousness intensified. She couldn't hide it. At dinner, the chairman questioned Maru about his background. Maru calmly stated that he was an orphan and had been expelled from college before finishing his studies. The chairman asked why. Maru looked straight at Jae-hee. She felt her heart pound in fear. Maru knew she was a murderer. He had seen her kissing her husband's assistant the night before. She was terrified that he would expose her and ruin everything she had built. Fortunately for her, the chairman wasn't impressed by Maru. He viewed him as a nobody, a joke. He made it clear that he would never allow a man like him to be with his daughter. Yoonji, feeling frustrated, turned to her father and asked what he really knew about Jae-hee. She coldly reminded him, "She's the woman who shamelessly seduced you when you were already married." Her words enraged her father. He grabbed a glass of water and threw it at her. In front of everyone, he publicly revoked Yoonji's status as the heir to the family foundation. Then, turning to Jae-hee, he ordered her to pay Maru off. If she didn't, he would sue him. Without another word, he stormed off. Yoonji, unwilling to accept her father's decision, chased after him. Finally, the chaos settled, and only two people remained, former lovers, now nothing but strangers. They sat together, but there was no going back. Maru smirked and asked Jae-hee how much money she planned to use to get rid of him this time. But Jae-hee, unfazed, asked if everything he had done that day was just to get revenge on her. She scoffed, telling him if that was the case, he was too naive. "You might as well take the money. After all, you're the one who sells your body for cash," she said without hesitation. Maru was stunned. He hadn't expected a woman to be so shameless. Jae-hee tried to explain, but Maru cut her off, humiliating her before storming off in anger. In the hallway, Maru saw Yoonji. He pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped her hair. Yoonji looked at him and said she really liked him. Maru asked if she would give up money for love. Instead of answering, Yoonji extended her hand and told Maru to take care of himself. Maru understood her decision. He asked for a goodbye kiss and told her that no matter what, he would wait for her. Yoonji was publicly disowned as the heir to her father's fortune after defying him. To make matters worse, her father gave Jae-hee the resort her mother left behind, planning to sell it to cover the company's financial losses. The thought of her mother's hard work being sold was unbearable for Yoonji, so she went to the resort to find a solution. Feeling lost, she called Maru and told him she wanted to see him. This completely broke down Maru's emotional defenses. He wanted to fly to her side immediately. Yoonji told Maru she was at a resort in Japan, a place filled with memories of her mother, but soon, it would no longer belong to her because her father was selling it. Maru reassured her, sending a kiss through the phone, and told her that even if she lost everything, she still had him. Yoonji smiled and said she'd come to him if she ever became homeless. Just then, Jae-hee approached Yoonji and taunted her about her lack of status. He flaunted his success, making her feel even more powerless. Maru, still on the other end of the call, heard everything. His heart ached for Yoonji, and he decided he couldn't let her face this alone. That night, Yoonji sat with the doll her mother had given her, silently praying for strength. She began organizing financial documents, searching for a solution. Hours passed, but she was getting nowhere. Maru stood outside her door, not wanting to disturb her. Eventually, Yoonji stepped outside, washed her face, and lay down on the grass. Maru walked over and tried to wake her, only to realize she had fallen asleep. He quietly stepped inside her room and saw the papers she had been working on. Understanding how important this was to her, he called a friend for help analyzing the financial statements. By morning, Maru had found a solution. Looking at the sleeping Yoonji, he suddenly picked her up and tossed her into the river. Shocked, Yoonji woke up, staring at him in disbelief. The man who had appeared in her dreams so many times was now standing right in front of her. Maru smiled and told her he would help her win this battle. Then, he handed her the financial solution she needed. Yoonji barely had time to thank him. She rushed straight to the signing ceremony. But when she arrived, Jae-hee was already celebrating his victory. She knew she was too late. Frustrated, she demanded to know why he hadn't waited for her. She explained that she had found a new financing plan, but Jae-hee smugly told her it was pointless. Everything was already finalized. Yoonji refused to accept it. She couldn't let her mother's legacy be sold off so cheaply. In a fit of anger, she grabbed the contract off the table and tore it to pieces. Furious, Jae-hee slapped her across the face. Yoonji stared at him, stunned. Jae-hee coldly told her that this was all the chairman's idea. He wanted to erase every trace of her mother. Heartbroken, Yoonji stood frozen as Jae-hee turned away and continued discussing the next steps with the beer. Just then, her phone rang. It was Maru. He asked how things were going, but Yoonji didn't answer. Maru instantly understood. She had lost. But he had expected this. He told her to put the call on speaker and hand it to the beer. The moment the beer heard Maru's voice, his expression changed. Maru revealed that the beer's company was nothing more than a shell corporation involved in a legal scandal. He wouldn't be able to secure funding for the deal. Panic set in. The beer, realizing he was trapped, quickly backed out. Yoonji had won. She had saved her mother's resort. Jae-hee clenched his phone in frustration. He knew it was Maru who had ruined his plan, but there was nothing he could do about it now. He had no choice but to walk away. Later, Maru called Yoonji and told her he was exhausted. He wanted to meet her in 3 hours. Standing outside, Jae-hee overheard their conversation. Not long after, Maru received an unexpected call from Jae-hee. Surprised, he answered. Jae-hee asked to see him, just for 10 minutes. Something in her voice made Maru hesitate. For a moment, he forgot about his promise to Yoonji. All he wanted was to hear what Jae-hee had to say. When they met, Jae-hee told him how much she missed him. With desperation in her eyes, she begged him to take her away, anywhere. Maru looked at his watch. It was time to meet Yoonji. Without another word, he turned around and walked away. Behind him, Jae-hee screamed his name. Then, suddenly, a loud crash. Maru spun around. Jae-hee was gone. Without thinking, he ran toward the edge and jumped. He didn't love her anymore, but no matter what, he couldn't just stand by and watch her die. Jae-hee woke up, hoping Maru would wait for her. She wanted to have everything she desired before they ran away together. But Maru couldn't stay any longer. Watching his former lover turn into someone unrecognizable, he thought about his date with Yoonji, the girl who only had eyes for him. He ran as fast as he could, and when he finally saw her, he couldn't help but smile. Yoonji had dressed up just to meet him. Overcome with emotion, he kissed her. The incident at the resort enraged the chairman. He had Yoonji's clothes thrown outside the house, took away her bank card and car keys, and told her she was on her own. Before leaving, Yoonji asked her assistant, Junha, how to take care of her father. She had no idea that her father already knew he was dying. He had entrusted her to Junha, saying that even if the whole world turned against Yoonji, Junha would always protect her. He hoped that this hardship would help her grow up quickly. Yoonji's departure thrilled Jae-hee. She felt like she was finally getting closer to her dream. Meanwhile, Yoonji went to see Maru, but he wasn't home. At that moment, Maru was with Jae-hee. She had taken over the bar where Maru worked and begged him to leave Yoonji and come back to her. But Maru, standing right in front of her, called Yoonji. He told her he knew she had been kicked out of her house and asked her to move in with him. Then, he finally said the words Yoonji had been waiting for. "I love you." Jae-hee was stunned. She couldn't believe Maru actually had feelings for Yoonji. She was convinced he was only using her. As Maru turned to leave, Jae-hee suddenly grabbed him and kissed him. But Maru didn't back down. He kissed her back even harder, then pulled out his phone and took a picture. He warned her, if she dared mess with Yoonji, he would release the photos to the public. Just as Yoonji was about to walk in, she received a message from Junha. He had discovered Jae-hee's secret relationship with Minyoung during a routine surveillance check. He hadn't dared to tell the chairman yet. He needed to warn Yoonji first. Realizing that her father's legacy was in danger, Yoonji decided to return to the company. She approached the striking workers, asking them to come back and help her. She even used all her assets to restore order, drinking heavily in the process. Her sincerity moved them, and she gained a bargaining chip to re-enter the company. Later, under the influence of alcohol, Yoonji called Maru and confessed her feelings for him. She told him she couldn't live without him and admitted she hated herself. Maru listened in silence, filled with regret. He knew he should never have dragged Yoonji into his mess. But at the same time, he couldn't let her go. She was the last warmth he had left in his life. When Yoonji woke up, she found Maru lying next to her, and happiness filled her heart. But Maru suddenly told her she should stay away from him. Yoonji didn't understand, but before she could react, he gently kissed her. Junha was shocked when he found out that the man beside Yoonji was Maru, the same person Jae-hee had accused of blackmailing her. He didn't know whether to tell Yoonji the truth or not. Meanwhile, Maru returned home to find Jae-hee beaten up. It turned out her brother, Jae-shik, had just gotten out of prison and had come looking for her. He stole Maru's phone and used it to call Jae-hee. Jae-hee froze. It was the moment she had feared for so long. Yoonji later ran into Maru's neighbor, who asked her to return something to him. Out of curiosity, Yoonji glanced at the picture inside. It was of Maru and Jae-hee together. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Looking up, she saw Maru standing in the sunlight. He looked exactly as she had imagined, but now, everything felt different. She stared at the photo in her hand, remembering the past. The three of them had once been together, and now Jae-hee's warning echoed in her mind. Everything clicked into place. Maru had gotten close to her as revenge against Jae-hee, and she had fallen hopelessly in love with him. One was the man she loved the most. The other, the person she hated the most, her stepmother. Yoonji didn't know how to face Maru. Seeing her pale face, he wanted to take her to the hospital, but she refused. She didn't yell at him. She just held back her tears. Maru walked away. The moment he was gone, Yoonji collapsed to the ground. She pulled out the documents Junha had given her, the ones that proved Jae-hee had tried to blackmail Maru. Everything made sense now. "I was so stupid," she whispered. Junha then told her the truth about what happened 6 years ago. Maru had gone to prison for murder, while Jae-hee had moved on and married her father. Junha promised to help her get revenge, but Yoonji refused. This was her fight, and she wouldn't let anyone else interfere. On the other side, Maru went to see Jae-shik. Jae-shik understood that Maru would never kill anyone. He must have taken the blame for Jae-hee. He promised he'd avenge Maru's death. Maru, angered, warned Jae-shik not to hurt Jae-hee. Just then, Jae-hee called Maru. She believed he had given her number to her brother to harass her. Maru listened silently, offering no explanation. Later, Yoonji met up with Maru for a drink. They sat next to each other in the quiet darkness of the night. After a while, Yoonji said she was tired and wanted to leave. Maru watched her in silence but didn't stop her. As Yoonji walked away, lost in thought and exhausted, she thought she saw Jae-hee. But she was too tired to keep her eyes open, and eventually, she collapsed. Meanwhile, Jae-hee hired a gangster to kill Maru, hoping to force him to stay away from Yoonji. Maru, seriously injured, asked Jae-gil to take Yoonji abroad so she wouldn't have to worry about him. At the same time, the chairman found out about Jae-hee's relationship with Min-young. Furious, he confronted June, asking how to protect his secrets and gather evidence against them. He vowed to send the couple to jail. Yoonji, who had fallen into a coma, was taken home by Jae-hee. When she finally regained consciousness, Jae-hee coldly told her that she had taught Maru a lesson. If Yoonji kept seeing him, it would only get him killed. But Yoonji just smiled. She knew Maru would never back down. She also knew that Jae-hee's plan would fail. Even if Maru had lied to her, she still chose to believe in him. Meanwhile, Jae-shik called Jae-hee, telling her that Maru had contacted him and threatened him, demanding he stay away from Jae-hee. Jae-hee froze, a man who had once loved her so deeply. Yet she had betrayed him again and again. Regret hit her hard. She wished she could undo what she had done. She decided to win Maru back, knowing she would never find another man like him. She prepared a special meal, carefully applied her makeup, and couldn't wait to see him. Yoonji, holding a small doll in her hands, thought back to her first meeting with Maru, their first kiss, the moments they had shared. None of it mattered now. She was going to find him, whether he had lied to her or used her. As long as there was even a shred of truth left in him, she wasn't letting go. Yoonji ran through the pouring rain as fast as she could. She finally reached Maru's door, ringing the bell over and over, pounding on it with all her strength, shouting his name. But Maru didn't answer. Drenched and desperate, she was about to give up when the door suddenly opened. Maru stood there, looking at her. His wounds ached, but his heart hurt even more. He walked toward her slowly and pulled her into an embrace. As he held her tightly, he noticed Jae-hee standing in front of them. His grip on Yoonji tightened. Later, Maru carefully bandaged Yoonji's wounds. He had no idea what she had been through to reach him. All he knew was that he couldn't let go of her again. Yoonji tried to check the wound on Maru's face, but he turned away. To him, the most important thing now was making sure she ate. But there was no food at home, so he went out to buy some. As soon as he stepped outside, he noticed a lunchbox left by Jae-hee. He didn't even acknowledge it and walked away. When he returned, Yoonji was already asleep. He gently tucked her in and noticed a note she had left for him. She wanted them to go on a trip together the next day. At the bottom of the note, she had drawn a picture. What she didn't realize was that the place in the picture was somewhere Maru and Jae-hee used to visit together, but never could. But that was in the past. Right now, Yoonji was the one he needed to protect for the rest of his life. Watching her sleep peacefully, Maru couldn't resist leaning in to kiss her. The next morning, Maru went out to buy clothes for Yoonji. Suddenly, he got a call from Jae-hee. Without hesitation, he hung up. Jae-hee, meanwhile, had found out from Maru's assistant that the chairman knew about her relationship with Min Young. Not only had he changed his will, but he had also started gathering evidence against them. Soon, they would lose everything. Panicked, Jae-hee wanted to beg the chairman for forgiveness. But Min Young told her it was useless. He would never forgive them. At that moment, Jae-hee thought of Maru again. She convinced herself that if she was willing to give up everything, Maru would come back to her. But now, Maru had hung up on her. Who was she to give up so easily? She picked up the phone again, her tone instantly shifting. She left Maru a voice message, pretending to be terrified, begging him to save her one last time. She claimed her brother was trying to kill her. To make it sound real, she smashed a bottle against the mirror. Maru's phone buzzed. He saw the message from Jae-hee. He didn't open it. When Maru got home, he couldn't help but listen to the message. His heart pounded when he heard Yoonji crying in frustration. Even if he no longer loved her, he couldn't just leave her like that. He called Jae-hee, but all he could hear was the sound of her sobbing. Suddenly, the call was cut off. At the same time, Jae-hee sent a message to Yoonji, telling her that she and Maru were together now. Yoonji stared at the message, unsure if she should trust Maru anymore. Meanwhile, Maru left Yoonji again and rushed to Jae-hee. Seeing the mess in her house and Jae-hee injured, memories of their first meeting as children flooded his mind. Back then, Jae-hee had looked at him with the same frightened eyes as she did now. His heart softened again. As he went to grab the first aid kit, Maru got a call from Jae-shik, who said he was in trouble and had been taken to the police station. Maru froze. Jae-hee had lied to him again. Any lingering feelings he had for her disappeared in that moment. Maru told Jae-hee that he wasn't seeking revenge, and that if she ever truly needed him, he would still come to her. What he didn't realize was that Yoonji had been standing outside the door, listening. It felt like her heart had been ripped open, yet somehow, she didn't feel the pain. Without a word, she turned and walked away. Jae-hee insisted that she regretted everything she had done to Maru and promised it wouldn't happen again. She said she was ready to leave everything behind and run away with him. But Maru refused. He had finally let go of his love for her. Without looking back, he walked away. As he stepped outside, he saw Yoonji driving off. He called her, but she didn't answer. He rushed home, only to find she was gone. He had no idea how much she had overheard, where she had gone, or how to face her. Meanwhile, the chairman ordered Junha to speed up the process of taking Jae-hee and Min-young down. He didn't have much time left, and he wanted to clear every obstacle in Yoonji's way. But what he didn't realize was that Jae-hee had a hidden weapon, something that could destroy him. Yoonji put on the clothes Maru had just bought for her and went alone to the beach where she had first met him. She filmed a video and sent it to Maru. When he saw it, panic washed over him. He was terrified that something might happen to her. Without a second thought, he ran out like a madman. All that mattered was making sure Yoonji was safe, because if she wasn't, he would lose his mind. When Maru finally found her, relief flooded through him. Seeing her safe made his heart settle, but he knew Jae-hee would keep using him to hurt Yoonji. He decided to leave her. As much as it tore him apart, he had no choice. Maru told Yoonji that this was the place where he had once made a promise to the woman he loved most, Jae-hee. But Yoonji stayed calm. She told him she had always known. He never told her because he was afraid of losing her. She said she didn't care about his past. Maru, determined to push her away, told her that he had only ever loved Jae-hee and had used Yoonji from the start. He confessed that their first meeting was planned. Yoonji refused to believe him. She hugged him tightly and begged him to run away with her, somewhere no one would recognize them. For a moment, Maru wanted to hold her, but he forced himself to push her away. He spoke cruelly. Yoonji left. Maru had accomplished what he wanted, but his heart ached. Meanwhile, Jae-hee confronted the chairman, presenting all the evidence of his fraudulent accounts. She demanded half of his fortune. Shocked, the chairman suffered a heart attack. Jae-hee panicked and tried to call for help, but Min-young stopped her. He warned that if the chairman survived, they would both be finished. Jae-hee hesitated. At that moment, Min-young noticed the chairman's phone was still connected to a call. It turned out he had been speaking with Junha. Min-young grabbed the phone and coldly told Junha that his father had been responsible for Yoonji's mother's death. If he wanted to keep his father safe, he had to keep that secret. Yoonji received a text from Junha. Her father was dead. She couldn't believe it. Devastated, she turned her car around. She saw Maru. Without thinking, she pressed down on the gas and drove straight toward him. Maru saw her coming. He didn't move. He stood there, waiting to meet her. A year later, after Yoonji's car accident, she vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Maru had turned into a full-time con artist, scamming people just to make money for his sister. He had no remorse. Families were ruined. Some victims even took their own lives. But he kept going, without a second thought. Jae-hee saw what he had become, and thought he was nothing more than a hollow shell of his former self. She wanted him to return to the man he used to be, but Maru remained indifferent. Jae-hee had climbed her way to the top as the acting chairwoman of the company, but her past as a mistress still haunted her. The elite wives of the rich and powerful mocked her behind her back. One day, Jae-hee stepped into Yoonji's old room. Staring at her picture, she made a silent vow. She wouldn't let Yoonji's existence destroy everything she had worked for. She ordered the maids to clear out all of Yoonji's belongings, transforming the room into a playroom for her son. Every night, Maru held Yoonji's picture in his hands. It was the only moment he felt alive. One morning, as he was walking outside, he overheard a woman arguing with two kids about how to spell Maru. That voice, it was one he had heard countless times in his dreams. He stopped in his tracks and slowly turned around. He couldn't see her face yet, but he already knew. It was Yoonji, the girl he had hurt beyond repair. Two kids were teasing her for misspelling a word. Without thinking, Maru picked up a pen and wrote the correct spelling on the wall. Yoonji looked up and locked eyes with him. "You're Maru," she said with a bright smile, as if she had just found something precious. Excited, she pulled out her camera, showing him picture after picture of the two of them together. "I was in a car accident," she explained. "I lost my memory, but I always remembered my name and yours." Yoonji didn't recall anything else, but the moment she saw him, she just knew. They must have been in love. But Maru stood there in silence. She went on, telling him how she had been searching for him, piecing things together from the photos on her camera. "We were in love, right?" she asked, her eyes full of hope. Maru didn't know how to answer. The Yoonji standing in front of him only remembered his kindness, not the pain he had caused her. Just then, her secretary arrived, breaking the tension. After the accident, Junha and the secretary had secretly sent Yoonji away for treatment, fearing that Jae-hee might try to harm her. Now, they had brought her back, hoping Maru could help her regain her memory. Later, Yoonji visited Maru's home. Looking around at everything, some of it familiar yet unfamiliar, she vowed that she would remember. The secretary revealed the truth to Maru, After the accident, Yoonji had lost almost all of her basic skills. She couldn't read, navigate, or even take care of herself properly. She also shared something else. Jae-hee was deeply involved in Yoonji's father's death. Maru listened quietly, his heart sinking. He knew that everything that had happened to Yoonji was because of him. If she ever remembered, she would only suffer more. Coldly, he looked at Yoonji and told her, "We were never lovers. We just took some pictures together. That's all." Yoonji was confused. "I'm busy," he added. "I don't have time for someone who doesn't matter to me." At that moment, Jae-shik showed up. Panicked that he might recognize Yoonji, Maru instinctively pulled her into his arms to hide her. As soon as Jae-shik left, Maru pushed her away. Yoonji grabbed his wrist. "Are you pretending not to know me because I'm not smart anymore?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "You have become stupid," Maru replied bluntly. "We're just friends." Yoonji refused to believe him, but Maru turned and walked away. The truth was, he didn't want to leave, but he had to. After the accident, Maru had been diagnosed with a brain injury. The doctor had urged him to get surgery as soon as possible, but the operation was risky. If he didn't make it, he might never wake up again. That's why he had thrown himself into making money, to make sure his sister was taken care of. But now, more than anything, he was afraid to acknowledge Yoonji. Maru's coldness shattered Yoonji. She knew he remembered her, but she couldn't understand why he refused to admit it. Jae-shik, who had been watching her from afar, realized something. This was Yoonji. A wild idea crossed his mind. Quietly, he followed her, filming everything. That night, Yoonji sat at her desk, practicing writing, determined to regain her memory. She believed that once she remembered everything, Maru would have no choice but to accept her. Before leaving, she wrote Maru a note. "I'll wait for the day you remember me." She left her phone number at the bottom. Back at home, Jae-gil broke the news to Maru. His sister had left. She had returned all the money he had swindled from people. She would rather die than let her brother become that kind of person. Jae-gil left too. "I can't stay here anymore," he told Maru. "I can't breathe around you." Alone, Maru sat in silence. He pulled out the note Yoonji had left for him, reading it over and over again. He missed her. More than anything, he wanted to see her. But he was too afraid, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had truly done the right thing. Jae-shik tracked down Minyoung and showed him a video of Yoonji. He offered to make Yoonji disappear forever for the price of a 20-story apartment. Then, he went to the secretary's house, looking for Yoonji. Claiming to be Maru's brother, he told her Maru had sent him to pick her up. Since Yoonji had just seen Maru the day before at his house, she didn't suspect anything. She was thrilled, thinking Maru had finally come for her. Meanwhile, the secretary rushed to Maru, alarmed. Yoonji was missing. Maru immediately realized that the only person who saw Yoonji yesterday was Jae-shik. He called Jae-shik, but there was no answer. That's when the secretary remembered she had installed a tracking app on Yoonji's phone. Maru snatched the phone and ran out, fearing that Jae-shik might harm Yoonji. He couldn't bear the thought of her getting hurt. Jae-shik, still fantasizing about his dream apartment, was caught off guard when Maru suddenly appeared and blocked his car. Furious, Maru demanded to know who had ordered him to do this. Before Jae-shik could answer, Yoonji stepped out and tried to calm Maru down. But Maru had lost control. He yelled at her, calling her reckless for following a stranger. How could she not have basic judgment? Yoonji, confused, explained that she thought Jae-shik was really Maru's brother, which is why she trusted him. But this only made Maru angrier. He snapped at her, and Yoonji froze, shocked and heartbroken. She never expected Maru to hate her this much. Tears welling up in her eyes, she told him she wouldn't bother him anymore, and walked away. Maru wanted to chase after her, but he couldn't. He knew he had hurt her again. Jae-shik, meanwhile, went back to the casino and lost everything. Desperate, he lied to Jae-hee, claiming he had taken care of Yoonji and demanding his money. But Jae-hee wasn't fooled. Instead of paying him, she called the police. Jae-shik barely managed to escape, but he knew Jae-hee wouldn't let him off that easily. Desperate, and with nowhere else to turn, he went to Maru. He confessed that Jae-hee was the one who ordered him to kidnap Yoonji, because she wanted to eliminate all obstacles in her path. Maru was stunned. He never thought Jae-hee could be this ruthless. He realized he had to protect Yoonji. Maru met with the secretary and promised to help Yoonji reclaim what was rightfully hers. Just then, the secretary spotted Jae-hee's men lurking near her house. She knew they had discovered Yoonji's whereabouts. She handed Maru the key to her house and told him to take Yoonji away, Immediately, Maru rushed to Yoonji's house. He told her they had to leave. But Yoonji, still hurt from before, refused. "I may be stupid," she said, "but I'm not going anywhere with a stranger." She ran into her room. Maru understood. She was still angry, and he didn't blame her. So he tried a different approach. He reminded her of their first meeting on the plane, their second meeting on the cliff, how he had once seen her as arrogant and standoffish, yet fragile and sensitive at the same time. Something in Yoonji shifted. Slowly, she opened the door. Maru promised to tell her everything, but there was no time. He had to take her away now. And he did, barely managing to escape Jae-hee's clutches. On the way, Maru told Yoonji everything about their past. But she couldn't believe it. She thought he was making it all up. Then, suddenly, flashes of memories surged through her mind. Images of them together, looking into each other's eyes. Meanwhile, Junha approached Maru. He had looked into Maru's past and knew everything. But still, he needed Maru's help to restore Yoonji's memory and reclaim what was hers. Maru agreed. Jae-hee, now a powerful woman with money and status, went to see Maru. But despite having everything she once desired, she felt empty. She had lost the one man who had truly loved her. Maru, however, had moved on. Holding Yoonji's hand tightly, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, like he was finally alive again. The day of Jae-hee's official promotion to president arrived. She stood on stage, delivering an impassioned speech. But suddenly, her expression froze. Yoonji was walking toward her. Step by step, Yoonji climbed onto the stage, the place that was rightfully hers. She addressed the audience, explaining that she had disappeared because she had been ill and needed time to recover. But now, she was back. Though still not fully healed, she had someone by her side to help her. Her fiancé, Maru. Jae-hee was speechless, stunned. Maru had hurt Yoonji before, so badly that they had broken up. So why were they still together? Why were they even engaged? She had been so close to winning, yet somehow, she had lost. What Jae-hee didn't know was that Yoonji had lost her memory. That today's speech, the poised, confident delivery, wasn't truly her. It was the result of Maru's relentless training, practicing with her over and over again. Deep inside, Yoonji was terrified. She didn't understand why she had to fight her stepmother. She was afraid that people would see through her, that they would notice something was wrong with her. But Maru squeezed her hand, reassuring her he had everything under control. Jae-hee wants Yoonji to live at home, but Maru stops her, saying that Yoonji will stay with him. Seeing their hands clasped together, Jae-hee invites Yoonji home for dinner. However, once Yoonji arrives, Jae-hee tells her to confess to her father. She never even got to see her father one last time, all because of a man. Looking at a photo of her father, Yoonji remembers Jae-hee's words and begins to cry. Jae-hee asks Maru why he came back. Maru tells her that Yoonji is the only woman who gives him peace of mind now, and he wants to protect her from those who would hurt her. He sarcastically remarks that everything Jae-hee has now was stolen, and sooner or later, she have to give it back. Yoonji is devastated that she missed her father's final moments for the sake of a man. Maru, heartbroken for her, reassures her that it's not her fault and tells her not to be too hard on herself. He knows he needs to set things right as soon as possible, especially since his health is deteriorating. His only option is to work harder. At the board meeting, Maru successfully outmaneuvers Jae-hee. Even Junha can't help but praise him, calling him a business genius. He comments that Jae-hee had no choice but to abandon him. Yoonji tells her doctor that she's been experiencing flashbacks lately. The doctor isn't surprised and explains that she's just running from her memories. He encourages her to be brave and try to recover them. But Yoonji looks confused. She doesn't understand at all. At home, Yoonji's sister suggests that she and her brother take a trip together. Yoonji likes the idea, but feels too shy to bring it up with Maru. Unbeknownst to her, Maru overhears their conversation from outside the door. The next day, Yoonji wakes up in the car, surprised to see Maru. The warmth of the sun reflects their happiness. In this moment, Maru finally stops resisting. He feels genuinely happy. Yoonji, who has never been in the kitchen before, is excitedly preparing food for the man she loves. Just as she's busy cooking, the doorbell rings. A man at the door presents a search warrant, saying they received a tip-off from the Tizen group. Maru is suspected of corporate espionage, and they need to conduct a routine search. It doesn't take long before they find evidence, and they move to take Maru into custody. Maru, unfazed, tells them that this is the first meal Yoonji has ever cooked for him, so they'll have to wait until he's done eating. Yoonji looks worried, but Maru reassures her. He praises her cooking and tells her not to worry. He'll prove his innocence. However, Maru is not actually arrested because they don't have a valid warrant. Instead, he goes to confront Jae-hee. She isn't surprised by his visit. Maru reminds her that even though he dropped out of school, his intelligence remains intact. He didn't expect her to resort to such childish tricks. But Jae-hee is confident. She claims to have enough evidence to send him to prison again, unless he leaves Yoonji and the Taizan group behind. Despite her threats, Maru refuses to back down. Instead, he turns himself into the prosecutor's office. He confesses to his past deceptions, but refuses to admit to the false accusations Jae-hee has made against him. He asks for a fair and impartial investigation, urging them not to be influenced by his previous mistakes. Meanwhile, Junha tracks down Minyoung and mocks him for framing Maru. Yoonji finally decides to stop hiding behind Maru. She wants to take charge of her own life and recover her lost memories. She visits her old home alone, catching Jae-hee off guard. Right away, Jae-hee notices that Yoonji is different. She even forgets that she's allergic to seafood and tries to eat it again. Jae-hee tests her further by offering food she never liked before. Just then, Maru arrives and takes Yoonji away. As they leave, Yoonji recalls how the housekeeper once told her she used to get angry whenever something she didn't like was on the table. She can't believe she used to be that way. Suddenly, she's unsure if she even wants her memories back. Maru tells Jae-hee that he's already handed over all the surveillance footage from the house to the prosecutors. He's confident the truth will come out soon. Jae-hee is desperate. She goes to Maru's house and demands that Yoonji leave him. In her frustration, she even resorts to hurting Yoonji again and again. Maru, seeing Yoonji in pain, furiously orders Jae-hee to get out of his house. Junha visits Yoonji, wanting to comfort her, but he holds himself back. He knows that in this moment, Maru is the only one who can help her. Watching from a distance, he finds solace in simply seeing her happy. That night, Yoonji has a dream. In it, she is driving a car in the wrong direction, filled with sorrow. She is so close to seeing the face of a man. Maru wakes up and realizes that Yoonji has disappeared again. He looks around anxiously, searching for her. Finally, he finds her asleep on a hospital bench. But when Yoonji wakes up, she looks at Maru blankly. She has forgotten him again. Maru is stunned, but he knows the truth. Yoonji is only remembering painful memories, and she is too afraid to face them. Maru takes Yoonji home and pulls out a picture of the two of them, handing it to her. Yoonji is in shock at what she sees and throws the photo to the floor. Overcome with emotion, Yoonji faints. Maru holds her all night. In the morning, Jae-hee arrives. Her sister criticizes her for being a traitor, but Jae-hee doesn't get angry. Instead, she says she has everything she ever wanted, but she's still unhappy because she doesn't have Maru. She says she came today to take Yoonji home. After all, she's her stepmother. Maru, furious, warns Jae-hee that if she ever messes with Yoonji again, he'll kill her on the spot. Later, Maru brings Yoonji some juice, but she knocks it over. He doesn't get mad. She does it again and again until she accidentally cuts her hand. Maru carefully applies medicine to her wound, feeling pain in his heart as he does. But deep down, he's relieved. He's glad Yoonji is angry with him instead of torturing herself. Once again, Maru steps out to get some milk. When he returns, he finds Yoonji finally crying, letting out her anger with heavy sobs. Maru quietly sets the milk down and steps back. Suddenly, a sharp pain strikes his head, and his condition worsens. By morning, Yoonji greets Maru calmly. She tells him she had a dream, one where Maru became a bad person who lied to her and hurt her. Maru asks what she would do if he were really like that. Yoonji replies that she would never forgive him. Maru chuckles, saying he's relieved. He tells her that if her dream were real, she should be ruthless with him. Yoonji just stares at him blankly. Meanwhile, Maru's desperation fuels Jae-hee's hatred even more. When she learns from Minyoung that Yoonji has lost her memory, she decides to use Yoonji's legal guardianship to seize all her shares, including control over Maru. At the board meeting, just as she's about to expose Yoonji's condition, a note mysteriously appears in her hand, revealing that she once hired someone to kidnap Yoonji. Maru had orchestrated this. He had contacted Jae-shik, who knows all of Jae-hee's secrets, including the fact that Maru once took the blame for a murder. Maru planned to use Jae-shik to keep Jae-hee in check. This was her biggest weakness. She had no choice but to continue acting as the official representative of Yoonji's company. Later, Jae-hee approaches Maru, saying she's willing to give up everything if he would just come back to her. Maru mocks her, saying she always wants things that don't belong to her. Their conversation is overheard by Minyoung, who grabs Jae-hee and demands to know if she's really willing to throw everything away for a man who abandoned her. But Jae-hee doesn't care. She buys the house where Maru used to live, walking through each familiar space as if he's still there. But deep down, she knows she's lost him forever. The man who once stood by her side is gone. Meanwhile, as Yoonji watches couples kissing on the street, she turns to Maru and asks why he never kisses her. Why does he always keep his distance? She asks if he's ever kissed her before. Maru remembers their first kiss, but seeing the hope in Yoonji's eyes, he lies. He denies it. He doesn't want her to expect too much from him. Hurt, Yoonji lets go of his hand, disappointment written all over her face. Junha informs Maru that Jae-hee has embezzled money and framed Yoonji for it. Enraged, Maru confronts the company treasurer. He lies, saying he has proof of fraudulent accounts, and pressures him into telling the truth to clear Yoonji's name. Afterward, Maru walks away, unaware that his own men are watching from a distance. Minyoung, terrified that Jae-hee will leave him for Maru, secretly arranges for the treasurer to be beaten to death. Since Maru was the last person to meet him, he becomes the prime suspect. Maru learns from Jae-gil that the police are after him. He rushes to Jae-hee and demands that she clear Yoonji's name. Then, he apologizes to Yoonji and forces Jae-hee to promise that she won't harm her again, or else he'll expose all her crimes. Just then, the police arrive. Maru looks at Jae-hee, realizing she's betrayed him yet again. Yoonji blames herself for what's happened. She believes Maru was arrested because he tried to help her. Desperate, she goes to Jae-hee and begs her to let Maru go. She's willing to give up everything, even the Tizen group, just to keep him safe. Jae-hee is stunned. Yoonji is willing to sacrifice everything for Maru. While she had once sacrificed Maru for power and wealth, a strange man came to see Yoonji. He pulled out a picture of himself with her and claimed they were each other's first love. But Yoonji had no memory of him. The man began telling her about their sweet past, including their first kiss. His words irritated Yoonji deeply. She remembered confessing her love to Maru in the rain, their real first kiss. She pulled away from the man's grasp. He wasn't her first love. He had been sent by Jae-hee to break her and Maru apart. Jae-hee had already succeeded in taking control of the Tizen group. She had paid a hefty sum to have the real murderer turn himself in. When she found out that Maru was being released from jail today, she arrived early to wait for him. But the first person Maru laid eyes on was Yoonji. The moment he saw her, he was overwhelmed with happiness. He had finally made up his mind. No matter what the future held, he wanted to be with her. Looking at Yoonji, he told her to remember this moment, because it was their first kiss. Then, he kissed her deeply. Yoonji took Maru to the place where he used to live. She told him this was where she had confessed her love to him. She recalled their sweet memories and expressed her desire to marry him. She wanted to wake up next to him every day. Seeing the hope in Yoonji's eyes, Maru agreed. As Yoonji imagined herself in a wedding dress, Maru watched her fondly. At that moment, he realized he didn't want her to regain her memory. He wished he could freeze time. He had never been happier. Meanwhile, Jae-hee was lost. She went alone to the tavern where she and Maru used to drink. One drink after another, she reminisced about their past. Overcome with frustration and resentment, she lashed out at the men around her. Minyoung arrived and took her away. Seeing the loneliness on Jae-hee's face, he was heartbroken. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned away. Jae-hee couldn't understand. Maru used to love her so much, but now he was breaking her heart over and over again for another woman. Minyoung told her to stay strong, promising that he would always be by her side. That night, Yoonji dreamt about her car accident again. The man's face remained blurred in her memory. She searched for records of the accident, but found nothing. Jae-gil knew about Maru's condition and urged him to have surgery as soon as possible, but Maru was content with his life now. His sister had fully recovered. Yoonji was by his side again. He wanted Jae-hee to leave him alone and let him be happy. He didn't want to wake up from the laughter in his home. He just wanted to live in his dream world forever. When Jae-hee saw the news of Maru and Yoonji's wedding, she was devastated. She went to Maru, begging him not to marry Yoonji and not to leave her. Maru coldly mocked her, saying she didn't deserve love. Desperate, Jae-hee found Yoonji, intending to reveal her past relationship with Maru and ruin their wedding. Just in time, Junha arrived and stopped her. Meanwhile, Jae-hee started spreading news of Yoonji's memory loss throughout the company. To counter the crisis, Junha suggested that Yoonji and Maru move up their wedding so that Maru could take over Yoonji's shares before they fell into Jae-hee's hands. Yoonji, however, was still haunted by the truth of her accident. She asked Junha about the man she had hit, but he brushed her off, claiming the man had already left the country. Maru knew he couldn't keep living in this illusion. He had to wake up. Yoonji deserved to know the truth. Back at the office, Yoonji found a file on her desk. When she opened it, she discovered the accident report from her crash. Maru's name was listed. In that instant, everything came rushing back. She finally remembered the full truth of the accident. For the first time, Maru's face appeared clearly in her memory. Overwhelmed, Yoonji collapsed to the floor. Every moment she had shared with Maru flashed before her eyes. Later, when Maru arrived for a meeting, Yoonji had fully recovered. Her eyes were still warm when she looked at him, but inside, her heart was breaking. At the board meeting, Yoonji faced aggressive questioning from the members. Without hesitation, she admitted her illness and voluntarily stepped down from the board. However, she declared that she would reclaim everything that was rightfully hers through her own strength. Her decision left everyone stunned. Maru praised her for her courage. Yoonji was surprised. She had expected him to be upset that she had disrupted his plan. Instead, he smiled and asked what she wanted as a reward. Like any girl, Yoonji asked for flowers and a cup of tea. For the first time, Maru picked out a gift for a woman. He chose each item with great care, waiting patiently for the woman he loved to arrive. At the same time, Yoonji visited her father's grave for the first time. She felt guilty that she hadn't seen him one last time because of a man. As she looked at her father's statue, she vowed to make those who betrayed her pay dearly. Yoonji arrived at the meeting place, her expression cold as she took in what Maru had prepared for her. The moment she heard Maru's voice behind her, she immediately masked her true feelings. She realized that her boyfriend was the cause of all her suffering. Determined to take revenge for his betrayal and deception, she made up her mind. Looking at the diary she once wrote for Maru, Yoonji found it ironic. She went downstairs and hugged Maru as he made breakfast, telling him she had another dream, one where he was leaving her. Maru wanted to take her somewhere where it would just be the two of them, and Yoonji agreed. He was overjoyed. Maru placed a ring on Yoonji's desk, but then she accidentally found a torn-up diary on the floor. Maru was stunned. He knew that Yoonji had regained her memories. He had deliberately placed the accident report there, waiting for this very moment. But instead of feeling happy, he was disappointed because he knew that any chance between him and Yoonji was gone. Yoonji called Maru, telling him the wedding invitations had been printed and that she was excited for their big day. Maru listened quietly, fully aware that Yoonji was just pretending. He knew she no longer trusted him, but he was willing to play along if it meant she would stay by his side. Yoonji approached Jae-hee, asking her to help plan the wedding as her mother. Jae-hee was reluctant, but she had no choice. Watching Yoonji in her wedding dress, looking so innocent, Jae-hee was filled with rage and wanted to tear her apart. Meanwhile, Maru silently observed the silent war between the two women. Jae-hee believed that this was all Maru's doing, that he still loved her, and that he was staging this to make her jealous. Overcome with emotion, she grabbed Maru's hand. Just then, Yoonji walked in. She saw what was happening, but chose to ignore it. She sat down right next to Maru, as if nothing had happened. Yoonji had plans to meet Jae-gil and his sister. She wanted to watch the uncomfortable interactions between people who pretended to be strangers despite knowing each other well. Maru had no idea what kind of revenge Yoonji had planned, but he was willing to stay with her until she no longer needed him. Jae-hee apologized to Maru for all the pain she had caused him over the years. She was willing to let him take full control of the company, as long as he stayed by her side. But Maru coldly responded that the first thing he would do was get rid of her, as she was the biggest obstacle in Yoonji's way. At the same time, a shocking news story broke online. The groom and his soon-to-be mother-in-law had once been lovers. Chaos erupted at the wedding venue as reporters swarmed in. Jae-hee, the center of the scandal, fled in a panic, but Maru was nowhere to be found. Yoonji remained calm because she was the one who had orchestrated the entire spectacle. She was determined to make them pay for their deception. When the commotion died down, Maru finally arrived. He looked at Yoonji, pain in his eyes. He had pushed her to the brink of ruin, and now she had regained all her memories. He was angry at Yoonji for setting this up, but more than that, he was angry at himself and Jae-hee. Why had he let things reach this point? Junha took Yoonji away, and Maru felt as though his soul had been drained. There was no reason for him to be by any woman's side anymore. But still, he would help Yoonji reclaim everything that was rightfully hers. Maru found Jae-hee and admitted that he was the one who had leaked the story to the press. He told her that he had loved her from the beginning to the end. Then, he asked if she would leave everything behind and come with him. Jae-hee didn't believe him, but she was still moved. Meanwhile, Yoonji sat in a bathtub filled with cold water, but it did nothing to ease the pain in her heart. She thought about Maru. She knew she should hate him, but she couldn't. Junha had no idea how to comfort her. All he could do was sit beside her and cry with her. Yoonji moved back home. Jae-hee put on a fake smile, welcoming her back, but then told her that Maru had admitted to leaking the news just to get revenge for being abandoned. Yoonji was shocked. She couldn't understand why Maru had taken the blame for something she had done herself. Maru wanted to call Yoonji, but he no longer had the right to. When his phone rang, it was an unknown number. He answered, but no one spoke. His instincts told him it was Yoonji. His heart raced, but he didn't dare say a word. Instead, they remained silent, connected only through their thoughts. Later that night, Maru drove a drunk Jae-hee home. When he saw Yoonji, he let go of Jae-hee's hand. This was what he had wanted all along. He longed to see Yoonji, but he could only do it in such a miserable way. Unable to stop himself, Maru went to Yoonji's room. He wanted to hold her, but he didn't dare. Instead, he simply asked how she was. Yoonji didn't answer. Maru turned and walked away. Yoonji wanted to go after him, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She had started to suspect that her father's death was linked to Jae-hee and Minyoung. After all, they were the last people he had seen. Junha knew the truth, but he was afraid to tell her. He feared it would destroy her. Instead, he handed the evidence to Maru, hoping that he would find a way to protect Yoonji and bring the real culprits to justice. Then, he went to Minyoung's office to submit his resignation and warned him to turn himself in as soon as possible. Otherwise, the evidence would be handed over to the police. Unbeknownst to him, he had just set himself up for disaster. Maru quietly listened to the recording Junha had given him, his mind already in chaos. He knew Jae-hee was ruthless and would do anything to get what she wanted, but he never thought she would go that far, even to the man she lived with, her own husband. When he confronted Jae-hee, he realized he should never have taken the fall for her 6 years ago, allowing her to make yet another mistake. Now, he wanted her to turn herself in. From a distance, Yoonji saw everything unfold. Jae-shik told Maru that someone had offered him an apartment in exchange for killing him. But instead of panicking, Maru calmly told Jae-shik to go ahead and do it right then and there. Jae-shik, however, hesitated, unable to act against Maru. Their conversation was overheard by Jae-gil, who stood just outside the door. He told Jae-shik that even if he didn't go through with it, Maru wouldn't live long anyway. He was suffering from a serious illness that could take his life at any moment. At the same time, Yoonji and Maru both received a call about Junha's accident. Yoonji immediately suspected that it was Jae-hee's doing. She believed Junha had uncovered something about them and that they were also connected to her father's death. However, Maru urged her not to make accusations without proof. He didn't want her to put herself in danger. But Yoonji saw it differently. She accused Maru of protecting Jae-hee and told him to stand by his woman while she found the evidence to put them all behind bars. Jae-hee soon overheard that Maru had all the evidence of her crimes and was planning to hand it over to the police. Fear crept in. Everything she had worked so hard for over the years was on the verge of collapse. Desperate, she went to the hospital to try and get information from Junha. But before she could, Yoonji stopped her. She coldly told Jae-hee that if she wanted to see Junha, she would have to strip down and allow Yoonji to inspect her first. Jae-hee's face immediately changed, but for the sake of her own agenda, she was willing to do whatever it took. Just as she was about to undress, Maru stepped in and stopped her. Seeing Maru's concern for Jae-hee, Yoonji turned away in anger. Maru instinctively followed her. He warned that her reckless behavior would only put her in danger. But Yoonji, feeling betrayed, believed Maru was only protecting Jae-hee after she had been humiliated. Maru didn't bother to explain himself or correct her misunderstanding. Instead, he simply told her that from now on, he would stay by her side 24/7 to prevent her from making any rash decisions. And he meant it. He even stood outside the bathroom door while she was inside. It was the only way he could remain close to her, even if it was misunderstood. Meanwhile, Jae-hee confronted Minyoung, demanding to know why he hadn't asked for her approval before dealing with Junha. Min-young, however, told her he had made up his mind. He was going to turn himself in and confess to all of their crimes. But Jae-hee felt neither relief nor gratitude. Instead, she pitied herself, feeling pathetic and alone. Later, Jae-hee arranged to meet Maru at a place full of memories from their past. She handed him a document, proof of fraudulent accounting and bribery committed by Yoonji's father. This single file was enough to destroy Tyson Group and everything Yoonji had left. Jae-hee offered a deal. In exchange for this document, she wanted the tape recorder Junha had given Maru. Maru hesitated. He found Yoonji and told her he wanted to take her somewhere where no one could ever find them. For a moment, Yoonji was tempted, but in the end, she refused. She couldn't run away, not when she had to protect Tyson Group, the legacy her father left behind, and uncover the truth about his death. Those things mattered more than love. Maru understood Yoonji's choice. He went to Jae-hee and told her that he had already given the tape recorder to the police. He was no longer afraid of Jae-hee revealing the evidence because he would protect everything that Yoonji wanted to protect. Maru asked Jae-hee to turn herself in, but she refused. She said she would rather die than surrender. She even asked Maru to die with her, saying that they were both pathetic people who had lost their love anyway. Maru was furious. He didn't want to die. He had never truly gotten what he wanted, but now, he wanted to live. He wanted to stay by Yoonji's side forever. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head again. Struggling, he forced his body to leave the place, but eventually, he collapsed. Jae-hee found out from her brother that Maru didn't have much time left. She panicked, her whole body trembling. Regret consumed her. She regretted all the times she had hurt Maru. She wanted to see him, to stay with him until the very end, even though she knew he no longer loved her. As she was leaving, she ran into Yoonji. Jae-hee suddenly thought about what Maru had said before, that he had never truly had anything he loved. At that moment, she wanted to give him happiness. She told Yoonji that Maru was sick. Yoonji went to the hospital. She already knew from Jae-gil everything Maru had done for her. She knew he had refused the operation just to be with her. Her heart ached, but she couldn't bring herself to go inside. She didn't know how to face him. Instead, she turned around and walked away, tears streaming down her face as memories of their past flooded her mind. Not far behind, a man was watching her. Maru found out from Jae-gil that Yoonji had been there, so he went looking for her. Meanwhile, Yoonji had stopped walking. Suddenly, she turned back, running like a mad woman. She needed to tell Maru that she had never truly hated him. Finally, they saw each other. Slowly, they walked toward one another. But then, Maru saw the man behind Yoonji. Without thinking, he ran and pulled her into his arms, shielding her. Time seemed to freeze. Maru's face turned pale, and the pain was unbearable, but he forced himself to stay strong, so Yoonji wouldn't worry. He lied, saying he had to go back to prepare for tomorrow's operation. Yoonji agreed and let him go. As he walked away, she called after him, asking why he hadn't avoided the accident when he had the chance. Maru smiled faintly and said it had been so long that he couldn't remember. In response, Yoonji kissed him. It was the first time she had ever kissed him. Despite the searing pain in his body, Maru's heart was overflowing with happiness. Yoonji turned to leave. Maru glanced down. His hands were covered in blood. His body gave out, and he collapsed. As he lay there, he thought about Yoonji's question. The truth was, he would never forget the car accident. He would rather die than live without her because he had already fallen in love with Yoonji. Meanwhile, Min-young called Jae-hee and told her he would take care of the last obstacles in her way before turning himself in. Jae-hee finally felt the weight of regret crushing her. She tried to call Yoonji, but there was no answer. She had no idea that Maru had collapsed in a pool of blood after saving Yoonji. Realizing the damage she had done, Jae-hee made a decision. She was going to turn herself in. She didn't want to make any more mistakes, and she didn't want Min-young to continue killing for her. At the police station, she confessed to all of her crimes, including the murder from 6 years ago. At that moment, she finally cleared Maru's name. She also gave herself a chance to start over. 6 years later, Jae-hee's sister married Jae-shik, the man who had secretly loved her since childhood. They now had a beautiful daughter. Jae-shik opened a fried chicken restaurant and spent years writing love letters to his secretary. His persistence finally paid off, and he won her heart. Junha eventually woke up. He let go of his feelings for Yoonji and started a new life. Jae-hee and Min-young both served their time in prison. After paying for their crimes, they each moved forward with their lives. Yoonji left the fast-paced city behind and opened a well-known fried chicken restaurant in a peaceful town because that was where her favorite man was. Maru had lost all memories of Yoonji after undergoing surgery 6 years ago. With the help of his professor, he returned to the US to complete his studies and became a doctor again. Eventually, he moved to his dream town and opened a clinic. Strangely enough, he ate at a tiny restaurant every day, even though the food was terrible. Maru knew that Yoonji secretly watched him every day and even took pictures of him. But instead of being angry, he felt nothing but happiness. He even went out of his way to accidentally run into her on her daily route. One evening, as the sun was setting, Maru held up a small ring, the one he had never gotten the chance to give Yoonji 6 years ago. At that moment, everything came rushing back. He finally remembered her. As their eyes met, Yoonji's face lit up with overwhelming joy. She had waited so long for this moment, and at last, it had arrived.